Hello, boys and girls of Credit Union Land, and welcome to episode 30 of the CUInsight Experience. My name is Randy Smith, and I'm one of the co-founders and publisher of CUInsight.com. It is my job on the show to have conversations with the best and the brightest of the credit union community. I get to pick their brains and see if we can't find a few nuggets that we can all learn from. Today's guest is Teresa Freeborn. Teresa is the president and CEO of Xceed Financial Federal Credit Union. She's also on the board of CUNA, and this was a conversation I was really looking forward to having. Teresa and I have met many times around credit union land, but never really had that chance to have that, an extended conversation like we did today. I knew from our prior interactions there would be no shortage of things to talk about, and I have to tell you, it didn't disappoint. It all held true. We talked about why credit unions need to gain market share to stay relevant. Teresa doesn't think that holding steady at 7% market share for the past 30 years is good enough. It's one of the reasons she was an early champion of CUNA's national awareness campaign. So we talked about that some. We also talked about inclusion. Yes, we need more diversity in credit unions, but we must even take it a step further than that to be inclusive as well and let people be themselves at work and hear those different opinions. That was an exciting part of the conversation to me. I love Teresa's passion around this area. Teresa had so many leadership and life lessons that she shared with us from over her career. A bunch of hacks that I think you're going to really enjoy as well. You won't want to miss a second of the second half of this show. As always, we wrapped it up with the rapid fire questions. This was a whole lot of fun. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did recording it. So, without further ado, I give you my conversation with Teresa Freeborn. Enjoy. Teresa, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good to be here, Randy.
Oh, I was really looking forward to this conversation. You and I have met quite a few times over the years, but haven't had that time to actually sit down and have a more in-depth conversation. So this was exciting for me. I wanted to jump right into it. You're on the CUNA board. I know the national awareness campaign is something that's very important to you. You were a early supporter and early. Just, somebody, I think from a movement standpoint that was talking about it. Could you, just tell our listeners, why do you feel that this is so important for credit unions, and why has it been personally important for you?
Well, I can't think of a more important initiative right now, because I think it's more or less a matter of survival for credit unions. Years ago, when a lot of today's credit union leaders were just beginning their careers, I think that pace of change in our industry and the financial services space in general was kind of glacial compared to what we're going through today. You could get along and you wouldn't really worry too much about competitors or innovation or even regulations, and your credit union would probably be okay. So, it's certainly not today's reality. So it's against that backdrop that I think makes it so important for us. And we cannot individually survive squirreled away in our little corner of the country anymore. But yet none of us is really big enough or rich enough to actually do anything on our own with this kind of initiative. So like so many other things that we've done in our industry that have been a big success, we band together and we do that collaboratively to make something happen. And I really do believe that now is the time for this kind of initiative. And I'm pretty passionate about the credit union movement. And I've always thought that our purpose-based financial service that we offer our members, and of course the financial education, the advocacy, it's just so important, and it's too important to let die. So, I look at this and think, if we don't do this, I just think that we may see an opportunity for us to sort of, to die off in time if we're not really acutely aware of how to put credit unions in the foremost of our consumers' minds. And personally, I've been in this industry for all of my working career. This isn't the first time that I've immersed myself in sort of this addressing the lackluster market share. And I introduced a cooperative program back in Vancouver, Canada. And then, of course, we did one in California. But now we're taking this national.
Oh, I absolutely love it. A couple of questions that popped into my head while you were talking. First, the idea of pace of change, now sometimes it's not like we even know who that competitor is. It used to just be the banks, let's just say. But now whether it's, fintech or Apple or Amazon or Starbucks or who else, it happens to be. I couldn't agree with you more. The other was, have you noticed a change when Tracy Kenyon was on the show earlier in the year? She mentioned that she feels like the last few years she's started to see more cooperation, and maybe for a little while we kind of got away from it. Have you noticed that as well, or? Yes,
I have, Randy. I feel that I think credit unions are feeling the same kind of angst I am as an individual credit union CEO, and we've got to do this together. It's where we succeed the best. And I just think the mood is that today. I really do. So I feel that I agree with Tracy. I
love that. So what are the biggest challenges you see facing credit unions today? You've talked about pace of change. Are there others?
Well, I guess we should put this against a pretty big backdrop, and that's about our market share, right? So it's been flat and hovering around that 7% mark. And that's been like that for 30 years. So, it's not like we're making any progress here, right? So we have to make some big changes in how America views credit unions to make a change in that market share. And so I think the challenge for this Open Your Eyes campaign that we're working on, just showing that we have to drive consideration upwards. And, when you look at all the wonderful research that CUNA just recently did, we always knew that there was, we always thought it was an awareness problem. But what we found out is that consumers really do have some major problems, like misconceptions, some myths about credit unions. It's not that people don't know what a credit union is. They do. 92% of consumers know what a credit union is. The problem is those that don't use credit unions aren't likely to consider one. They just don't think they can have any of this amazing business structure, which is crazy.
Did the research show why they think that that it's not being a consideration? Do they think they can't join, or?
Yes, those are actually two of the biggest myths out there. I can't join one. I'm not eligible to join one. And the second is even if I can join one, are you sure I can actually access my money? Do we have the same kind of, networks and technology and sophistication of product and service and all of that? So it kind of goes hand in hand.
I'd like to say it's surprising, but it really doesn't, just from the people that I talk to. I think we all do it, right? Like, we educate people on credit unions every day, whether we're sitting on an airplane or someplace else where it's like,
well, and what's interesting, we do it one new member at a time. I'm sure we all do. But I think it comes down to just our very structure, the cooperative financial institution structure, where we have to abide by a field of membership. And so it's always been viewed as that closed club, right? So we're now saying, look, there's a credit union for everyone. We'll help you find one. And then, of course, that sort of breaks open that very exclusive membership. So we have to just work on breaking down that myth for sure, because that's the big one and that's the starter. They can't even come near us if they think they can't be eligible to join. So
it's been cool this year to watch the campaigns roll out in the different states. So it's I look forward to seeing how well it does. I know it seems like in the early states, it's getting a ton of exposure. So that's a beautiful thing.
It is. And the only thing I'd say is that it's great to have Liftoff. It's great to talk about media metrics, and we're talking about all that, and it's very exciting. But this is a program that has to be sustained as well. So we can't lose sight of that. We're going to have to make sure that we keep going on it, because consumers, they don't change financial institutions. They don't buy checking accounts or mortgages like they buy groceries every day. Okay. So these are sort of longer term. It might be a year, it might be 2 years longer before someone even goes, you know what, I'm done with this bank and I'm going to make a change. And who do I go to? And we have to be in that top of mind consideration. So you kind of just whittle away at that consumer mindset over time. So I'm hoping that people are excited about the media metrics, because they are showing that whatever we did, the approach that we're taking, the creative we're using, the buys we're making is working. We want to make sure that it's actually starting to change that consumer mindset, and that's going to take some time. So I'm super jazzed, as you can imagine.
I love it.
It's off to a good start, so it feels good.
That's for sure. I'd like to switch gears a little bit. I know something else you're passionate about is, sharing life lessons from your career. We were talking earlier, you and Jill were on a panel together, and that's a place that I would like to focus a little bit is on inclusion. We'll hit on the broader leadership lessons and topics later in the show, but what do you see? You've had success in your career. You mentioned earlier, you've been in this a few years now. What are the roadblocks that you see to inclusion in credit unions specifically?
Well, that's an easy one for me to address because I think without question, the biggest roadblock to inclusion in credit unions is the fact that a large number of leaders in those top positions today really don't think we have any problem. They don't think there's a problem here, so that there's no roadblock. They can't understand that. And, I've been involved with countless boards and industry organizations over the year. And many of the times I've walked into those rooms being the only woman. The good news is today there are more than usually one, which is kind of nice. But people look around the room and they see a few women. They may even see a few minorities and various, ethnicities. And they conclude at that moment, well, there you go. We've achieved diversity. So there's the first problem, right? It's not intentional bias. Almost no one that I encounter at credit unions these days is overtly sexist or racist or hostile towards people that don't look like them or sound like them. It's such an unconscious bias. And, they don't consider themselves personally sexist. So it wouldn't be surprised if they thought things were better for the women in their lives, perhaps their mothers, their sisters, their wives, and how about their daughters? They just think it's better, but it really hasn't been, we haven't really made that kind of progress. And, most credit unions, look around, most credit unions really do lack the basic diversity, which is gender, let alone racial, let alone diversity of sexual orientation, let alone diversity in age. And how about just diversity of thought? I mean, we can't. And so I think step one of this is we have to admit that we still have a problem and we need to come up with a solution. I think that's where I want to go with that,
Yeah, I know this is an important topic for both of us. One of the stats that always sticks in my head that Jill had told me probably a year or two ago now was that, and it kind of goes to your people don't even realize the bias that they have, or they think it's better than it is. But it was the idea that if you ask people if there's one woman on a board, many men think that's a diverse board, even though women are half the population. So
it's like, check, we've done it. There you go. We got a woman.
We got this. It's a topic that I've been trying to bring up a lot on the podcast to just keep the conversation going. And I would ask you this is, to truly change, to make credit unions more inclusive and have more diverse, not only boards, but thoughts, like you said, on the boards. Is this something that you see happening at an individual level? Is it at the credit union level? Is it systematic change that needs to be, you're on the CUNA board, that needs to happen at the national level? Or is it, kind of a combination of all of them?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a need for the all of the above approach without question. And, it was some years ago, well before the lean in phenomena, when I took my job here as the CEO of Xceed. And the first thing I wanted to do was to connect with peers, but peers meaning my fellow female CEOs. That's kind of who I wanted to check in with. And what really hit me at that time, and that was, going on 13 years ago, is that how underrepresented women were in those upper ranks of the credit union movement. And so I contacted the Filene Research Institute and I said, you need to tell me more here. We need to dig a little deeper. And they did. That was back in 2014 was the recent study that they've done as well. And although we can say, wow, 70% of our workforce in credit unions is female, but it's more like 35 to 40 are actually in the senior ranks. And I don't mean CEO, I mean like at sort of an executive level. And so then you could say, well, wait a second, maybe there's a ray of sunshine in all of that, because look at those credit unions that are under 50 million in assets. Life appears really great for them. There's pretty much over 70% of those CEO positions are held by women. So I don't want to diss the small credit unions here, but the problem is those small credit unions appear to be something that I used to refer to as the pink collar ghetto, where these large numbers of women are congregated in these very low status and lower paid positions, largely because, of course, those positions are so not desirable to men. Yep. Okay. Both in stature, both in comp, they're not interested in those, but we kind of brag about that. Well, look at all the women there again. But are we really okay that in our movement that prides itself on cooperative and and participative models, because that's really what we are. Female representation at that highest level is so far short of percentage of the population, percentage or proportion of our credit union workforce. I mean, it's pretty dismal. And we all know the research. There's a great body of research out there that shows that it just makes good sense, to have more women in those senior ranks in terms of profits and assets and growth and equity and all of that, let alone monitoring of your corporate affairs and, quality of decisions, and just bringing an expansion of ideas and perspectives and attention to details and all that kind of stuff. Women have different things they bring to the table. So it's like, such an important gap to fill for us to be as businesses going forward, for sure.
I agree with you. Is there a piece of advice that you would have for maybe somebody younger who wants their seat at the table? What advice would you give them?
I love it when I'm asked those questions because, I think everyone's always looking for something. Wow, it's going to be hard to do, but it's kind of simple. And I think women, we're just wired a bit differently. And I certainly want to touch on some of that. But volunteer for the hard jobs, for the ones that you really don't want to do or others don't want to do, because you want to get that experience and you want to get that exposure to those that are in those decision-making positions. You want to have a leadership role badly enough to work for it. You have to be sort of seen that you're one of those people that someone would pick up and see a spark there and say, I'm going to help this person get ahead. So that's the first thing I would say is, you know what, guys, nobody gives you the power. You got to just take it. So I would just say get involved a lot more. But I think that, we've got to be careful too, that you have to inspire confidence in your senior teams, in your boards, and don't confuse confidence with bluster. I think that at the end of the day, preparation is probably the most important strategy that we can do for building confidence, right? So even today, and we talked about this at a conference that we were just at, and, I've been in this business for 4 decades, and I'm going to tell you, I've done pretty much every aspect of a credit union. But, whenever I'm entering a new situation, I just suggest that everyone look at this and say, make it your business to become an expert on the topic. Like, just do a little research, take a little time. It's amazing what you can do. And you're going to feel more confident and you're going to present yourself better. And I think that's just what women really need to do a lot more of. So anyway, that's kind of where I would go with that in terms of advice. It's really simple stuff, right? Be kind to people, for God's sake. They'll remember that because you never know who these people are that are going to help you down the road. So, just it's the real basic things in life.
I've heard a few different times in conversations on this show with women who have said, like where you said, do the tough or, take on the tough job, where it was like, we were doing the job before the title. They couldn't not give it to us, So
right, exactly.
It's good advice. Something else that I know about you, and you've talked about it. You just did earlier about going to Filene or doing some stuff statewide. The idea that you've been very actively involved on the from a national level. Why is that important to you? And how does your credit union back home benefit from the work that you do and what you're involved in nationally?
Well, I'm very fortunate to have a board of directors at Xceed that they always recognize that credit unions collectively we're kind of all in this together, and they have been big supporters of credit union collaboration because they know our situation. They know we are a movement, right? We hang together. If we don't hang together, we're going to surely hang separately is kind of, how we view the world there. But I think the board just recognizes that no one credit union, including Xceed, has the resources to keep our industry afloat and to battle alone with the competitive forces and, the lobbying efforts. We have to do all of those things. We have to do it together. But here's the other thing. The good part, too, is that we all learn a lot from each other. So we learn a lot from other credit union innovators. My board does. I do. My team does, that we can apply to our business. And, so we encourage all of our senior leaders at our credit union, not just me, but to be very active in our industry's organizations. I think more of us need to step up there. It can't just be the same people all the time.
Absolutely. So now, was that something that when you came into Xceed that your board already had that type of vision, or was that something you had to, I don't know if train them is the right way, but, show them the benefits of it?
Well, ironically, I met the chair of the board of Xceed before I was working here. I was with another credit union at the time, and I had met them on many occasions going to events, going to lobbying events and that sort of thing. And so I was already networking with them. So they already had a pretty good involvement. My predecessor was Bill Cheney,
Right.
so you can imagine that he was very involved in the industry as well, and they supported him. So it was kind of easy for me. I may have kicked it up a notch. I'm very inclusive in my nature, and I'm very proud to take my volunteers with me when I go to industry events. And I just respect that they bring that, again, a different perspective to the table. And that's what needs to be demonstrated there. So I may have helped a little bit, but they were already well tracking for this, for sure.
They were ready. This is a question that I was looking forward to asking you, even though it's a podcast and no one will be able to see your facial reaction to this. But what is your reaction to the phrase, "That's the way we've always done it"?
Oh, my. Well, let me first say that it's not that there isn't value in experience or things that are tried and true. And I always say that to my associates. So not at all, but I've heard it too many times. And so instead of sort of popping an artery when I hear it, I simply come back with the facts like market share, consumer research that prove that the way we've always done it isn't necessarily good enough anymore. And it's hard because most organizations know that things need to be different in some way. I mean, everybody says that, right? We need some changes, but folks still lead with that credo, and change is so hard. I get that, but it's always needed, and it's worth the effort. And, something one of my previous bosses taught me some time ago is that every day you get to be a little smarter, right? Which really supports why the credo of "that's the way we've always done it," it really just doesn't make any sense, because every day you get to be that little smarter, right? You've learned something new that you can apply.
I absolutely love that phrase. So that is so true, and a great way to look at it every morning when you wake up. The change, it leads perfectly into the next question I wanted to ask you, and that's, is there a belief that credit unions hold today that you think will have to just fundamentally change over the next few years for us to still be relevant?
Well, I'd probably answer that question yes and no. Yes, there are a lot of credit unions that simply aren't keeping up with the technology and the consumer trends and the imperatives related to diverse and inclusive workforces, for instance. And those credit unions are going to have to change radically, or be absorbed by other credit unions, or simply go out of business. And there's no future with them without that fundamental change. But then the flip side, sort of no. And, there's so much that's really good about credit unions, and that we're doing really well. And I think it's important to remember that we don't necessarily want to change everything. In fact, we can't change what makes us as financial cooperatives special. And that's that member-owned, not-for-profit structure, our purpose-based banking model, and our advocacy for our members and their financial well-being, and our focus on being our members' true financial partner. These are such huge differentiators in our marketplace from those big banks and other competitors. And I think they're still really relevant in today's marketplace. For sure.
I agree with you. You put that beautifully. I'd like to move on to the second part of the show, the leadership and life hacks. I know you have a lot to share, so I want to make sure I get that out of you for our listeners. To start with, what was the inspiration for you to take the gig as president and CEO of Xceed Financial?
Well, I can say that. Yeah, I could answer that really quick by saying I just want to boss people around, but really I don't. I did always want to be a CEO, and I sort of aspired to that many, many years ago. So you got to know that. But as a marketer, I came up through the marketing and communications rank. So as a marketer and a communicator and a saleswoman, because that's what I'm just business development, right? I felt so confident in my skill set. I thought these are the attributes of a CEO. And I'm also I think a pretty decent networker. Okay. I've established relationships with, even some of my board members before I came on here. I mean, I've got that sort of tried and true. However, no one was really looking for a marketer to take over a CEO position. So that's what was happening to me. I was very enthusiastic about it and very inspired to be one. But, it was just a tough slug.
Yeah. I would tell you, as somebody who finds marketing so fascinating, I love that it seems like, at least from the blimp level that I look at, you're seeing more marketing roles, I think, and how important they've, working their way into the C-suite that maybe they weren't a decade ago. And you're seeing the like more CEOs that have the marketing background as well. So I love seeing it because to me, that's the group of people that, you know, they really have a finger on the members and what their needs are.
Randy, I always say nothing happens till somebody sells something. And why wouldn't you want to have a marketing person at the helm, for goodness sake? Yeah. So it's a big shout out to all my marketing people out there. They know they've got
absolutely. I'm with you on that. I second it. So, you know, has the inspiration changed? You wanted to be a CEO for a long time. You get there. How has the inspiration changed with time on the job?
Let's just say I've been validated. Okay. Like my inspiration, I just feel that it took a while, but I got there. And I guess all of that to say that if you're inspired, be true to it. Just keep hammering away at it. It's going to happen. Right.
Just keep going forward. So how would you describe your leadership style?
Well, I don't know if you can put my leadership style in a particular box, but I'm certainly adaptable, and I'm certainly capable of executing multiple styles in any manner that fits any kind of situation put before me. But I'm probably somewhere between a charismatic and a transformative leader, I would say, if you're looking textbook-like. And, you know, I work on being inspirational. I work on having a big picture vision. I'm passionate and I'm emotionally connected. Those are sort of my ways to get people motivated. So I gravitate to more of that sort of, you know, the big personality role versus a detail-oriented style. That would be the antithesis of kind of what I represent.
What you do. How would your team describe you?
Well, let's just say they wouldn't say I'm detail-oriented.
I love it. Mine would not say that about me either, by the way. So
yeah, they agree with me, I think.
Has your leadership style changed since you've become a CEO? Were there things that you've had to adapt, you know, in your time as that, you know, leading the ship?
Yeah, and I would say it's probably that I might be a bit more cautious than I was, and I'm more protective of my associates. And, you know, I've got 200 associates, and I think that's what happens when you've got 200 people that are kind of looking to you for their future, right? I mean, absolutely. I feel this immense responsibility toward them, and say the 10 people they're connected to. And if you sort of do the math, it's like you've got a big responsibility. So when I think of, you know, I'm always battling that. Am I doing right by my associates? These people that are relying on me to provide a future for them. And that is probably what's changed over time, is just sort of the acknowledgement of that really serious responsibility.
I've mentioned it on the podcast before. I remember my job changed completely the day at CUInsight we hired our first employee. And it was just like, oh, wait, I'm responsible for her and her 2 children and the macaroni and cheese on their plates. And oh, yep. So I no longer
they're human beings. Yeah, and
absolutely.
They're humans. And, you know, we can't forget that. And so it's a lot. It's a big responsibility. But I would just say that's the big thing that switched for me.
So you mentioned your 200 associates. What's the greatest strength of your team there at the credit union?
I love to say that it's honesty and transparency, and I hope I provided an environment, and I see it played out every week as we meet, and it's very open, and people feel comfortable in saying what's on their mind. And to me, I can't get anything done until I really know what's going on. So I love it.
So they're comfortable saying what's on their mind. What have they heard you say so many times they can finish the sentence?
I mentioned it earlier, and that is, I think every day that I say this every day, and I swear it's every day I get to be a little smarter, because I find that we make mistakes all the time, right? We have failures. We take risks and things don't happen the way we think they should. And we look at it and go, but tomorrow we're going to be smarter about this. We're going to do it differently. So that's probably the one thing I say all the time.
They can hear it coming. When you think back to earlier in your career, is there a mistake that you made, maybe one that you see many young leaders make?
You know, I think it comes with age, doesn't it? And yeah. You know, when I think back to when I was younger, I just wasn't as bold as I could be. I was bold on a personal basis, you know, with friends and all of that. But in the workplace, I wasn't as bold as I should have been. And, you know, I certainly, I mean, I've made some gutsy moves. I've moved countries for jobs now, right? But I probably would have made them earlier. I think I would have made them earlier if I was bolder. And now that I'm getting to the place where, you know, I've had all these years in both countries, both Canada and the US, and I look at this and think, oh my goodness, there's still so many things I want to do in my career. Am I going to have time to do all these things? And I think, God, I wish I had started a lot earlier. So that's the only thing I would say is start early, be bold, and just follow your heart. It's not going to lead you astray. It's just not. And I think that I just didn't trust that.
Be bold earlier. That's probably a pretty amazing lesson for all of us, right? Yeah. For people that are coming up, because we only have so much time. We can't control time, that's for sure. Right. So it's the same for each of us. But has there been a piece of advice or a life lesson that you find yourself going back to all the time?
It's simple. I came from a family of 4 girls. We didn't have any brothers, just four of us sisters. And I can still hear my dad always saying, go for it. And I'm guided by that always. Go for it. Just that simple. So if I ever have a hesitation, I think about that. And I usually do.
You know what? Moms get mentioned on the podcast a whole lot. So it's nice to hear Dad getting mentioned too.
Yeah, for sure. My poor dad, surrounded by 5 women. I mean, he needs mention.
I was just going to say, yeah. I grew up with a family, and they had what was it? He was the friend that I had was I think it was the 7th child. They had 6 girls before having him. The father was just kept trying, I guess. So.
I know. I went to school with a family of 9 girls, and we all hung out together. So you can imagine all those girls. Oh my goodness,
that's a lot of girls.
Yeah,
for sure. Question for you: when you run into a wall, do you have something that you do to just maybe take a look at it from a different angle, or to kind of push you through to the other side?
Well, sometimes you just feel so deflated, and you think that there is no resolution, there's no solution, there's no answer to the problem. So I think the first thing I do usually is I just need some quiet time. I need to think about it, like deeply think about it. And then what do? I usually reach out to my extensive network. And I asked them for help and ideas on how they would look at something like this. And I'm talking family, friends, and coworkers. And I will go to my daughter and ask her how she feels and how she would respond to something like this. I need all these perspectives in front of me. And then all of a sudden something happens. And it's like 9 times out of 10, I'll be sitting there and then it's like someone turned on a switch. Once I got all that input, somebody turned on a switch. There's a big bright light, and there's the answer or the solution. And I think, oh my goodness, this is why this is so important to approach these things that way.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I know you have a vast network around credit unions, but that's also, you reach out to the network outside of credit unions as well.
Oh, definitely. Yes. I got my girl posse for sure.
That's fantastic. As a leader, how do you make sure that your message stays fresh to your team? And then also that, that culture and message stays fresh, to your members as well outside the credit union?
Well, I'm going to answer this as a true marketer would. I tell them and I tell them and I tell them again because they can't hear it the first time. Okay. And there's so much message clutter out there that, I like to make my communications passionate, and I try to find some emotional connection, but I do repeat myself because I know what it's like. There's just so much coming at us. So I think you just got to be patient in getting the message out, but be consistent. And for goodness sake, make it emotional and tell a story, be passionate about it. And that's the best way to communicate in my mind.
I love marketers. If you have a free day, I know you keep yourself extremely busy, but there's nothing on the calendar. What passions do you have outside of credit unions? How do you recharge? What does, work-life integration look like to you?
Well, it's interesting because I think people don't assume I have a multifaceted life. They think all I do seems to be working, but it's so not the case. Obviously, I have a passion in that the golf course is my happy place. I could golf every day if I could, but it's too dang hard to get to do it with any regularity. So I'll always be a mediocre golfer. But I think that the only way I recharge is I have to have a fitness workout every day I'm in town. I'm obsessed with it. And I just do that. And without that, I couldn't feel as good as I feel every day as I get up and walk into my office. But I also love to spend time I have a 22-month-old granddaughter who is sort of kind of, worked her way up to number 1 on the most important slot of my life.
Okay. Well, congratulations on that, first of all.
Super exciting. And then I cherish the times that my hubby and I can actually just have dinner and non-work related travel. How about that? Non-work related. Like we actually plan a trip for us. And I love that time. And then I also spread some time out for my daughter and I run a little business together. And that's sort of a fun and a great diversion. So I think when I think of what recharges me, it's the fact that I've got multi-layers and, lots of different things to do in my life. It's not just one focus. So I love that.
Is there a link to the business you guys run? Should we give it a shout out or?
Well, what it is it's women's leisure wear. So what we do is we've revolutionized the romper. Okay. So women's rompers, big deal. So, but yeah, we're having a lot of fun.
If there's a website there, we'll link to it in the show notes. You can send it over and maybe we'll sell a few rompers. So.
Oh, that's too fun. That's too fun. You're going to get Jill in one for sure. So I'm going to work on that.
There we go. She'll be excited. So, yeah. Okay. Well, I want to be respectful of your time. So I'd like to get to the third part. These are rapid fire questions. The questions are the only thing rapid though. Your answers do not have to be. Do you remember the first time you got in trouble, like memorable trouble that you can tell us about?
I'm sure my father would tell you that I was just a terrible teenager, but I do remember one in particular, 14 years old, snuck out of the house through a bedroom window. We all did that, I'm sure. 2 in the morning, arranged to meet all my friends. I returned at 4 a.m. There was my dad waiting for me. He was not very pleased. And the irony is with this though, is that, we girls got out. And we all wandered around some darkened street with nothing to do. There was nobody going out there. There was no activity whatsoever. But of course, that didn't deter my parents, who grounded me, of course, for the next 2 weekends. And I think it was my first lesson learned on risk reward. What the heck was I thinking to give up 2 weekends for a nothing event? Okay, so that just sort of struck with me. I'll never do that again.
That's I do think we all have that story, right? Like where we thought we were being so sneaky. But, do you have any daily routines? You mentioned physical activity when you're at home that you just have to do or your day feels off.
Just a couple of things. Definitely the physical activity, got to do that. But I have a 545 triple shot cappuccino that I can't live without.
We bought an espresso machine about 2 years ago, and I don't know how we lived without it before it, but it's saved on the Starbucks bills, that's for sure.
Exactly.
So, you don't have to run out and get it. The random question, what's the best album of all time? That one that you can listen to from front to back.
Wow, tough choice because my era, this tells you my age, I think, but Carole King, Tapestry, Led Zeppelin, Ford, Janis Joplin, Pearl. Those are my favorites of all time. I know every single track and can sing along with every one of them. But the only thing I would say, though, is it's hard to choose an album. You got to know that. Yeah. So early Beatles, I'm telling you, if everyone just listened to an early Beatles tune every morning, they would start off on the absolute best foot for sure. Put you right in the right headspace.
There's a song from a few years back that it was the wildest thing, but it was an early Beatles song. And when I was in Indonesia, I went into this little pizza place and there was an Indonesian man singing a Beatles song really well. And it just stuck in my head that I put it on a playlist and I've probably listened to it about weekly ever since. So, I am a big reader and we have a stack of books and most are from people recommending them to us. Is there a book that you've either gifted over your lifetime often or that you just think everybody should read?
Well, I have gifted probably, I bet you 50 times, a book by Seth Godin. It's called The Purple Cow. And, it was that book that actually launched, I think, a movement that to make really remarkable products that are worth marketing in the first place, right? So you're either remarkable or you're invisible. So I think they're kind of wise words to live by. And I love that I give these to my very cerebral, financial-oriented people, too, and they see the wisdom here, so I love it. But that's the one I'd give out, hands down.
I had the chance to see him speak earlier this year, so it was fantastic, because I am a fan of his as well. As you've gotten older, what's become more important to you? And the part of this question I like the best, what's become less important?
I'd say time. We talked about that earlier. Time is our most precious resource and you need to protect it. Okay. And this sort of fits with what I do for my lifestyle and my multifaceted approach to life because you only have so much time. But I think that, when you witness anything ism, as in sexism, racism, ageism. Can we just call bullshit on that? Because staying silent is certainly just compliance. And I just think that it's not okay to ignore it. It's not somebody else's issue. It's too easy to say that and walk away. And I would suggest that we need to call out anything that sort of hints of discrimination, hints of intolerance and bias and inequality and prejudice. I mean, just say something. I think that's what I would just encourage everyone. Yeah.
I second that. I will tell you, earlier this year, there was an article, and it was actually by a white NBA player. And he wrote about that in the Players Tribune, that like for so long, he was quiet. He didn't agree with stuff, but he just was quiet. And he was like, I no longer will be quiet. You don't have to worry or you'll never have to ask which side of the fence I'm on, right? Like,
exactly.
Or that I'm one of yours if you say something. And he was talking about all the isms. He's like, I will not be quiet. And it was something that I remember reading that like during my journaling and things like that. I'm like, how often have I been quiet? Like, I know what I feel, but am I quiet? And I tried to make a concerted effort to say, you know what, I'm not going to be quiet anymore either. So
I
absolutely love what you just said there. I think it's such that is a strong and beautiful thing that we should all do a little bit better. That's for sure. Do you have any final thoughts or asks for the listeners today?
Maybe we go back to the beginning of our conversation. And if I could think of the two things that I'm very passionate about in our industry. And the first, of course, if you're a credit union who is not yet committed to the National Awareness Initiative, then shame on you. And, our stagnant market share is everybody's problem, and we can only solve it together. So stop dwelling on all the reasons why we can't do it. And for goodness sakes, start asking what happens if we don't do it. A really important question. So that's one.
A great question.
And the second one was, let's talk about that diversity one more time. Commit to improving this diversity, equity, and inclusion in the leadership ranks of our credit union system, because it's embarrassing. And stop preaching the value of this new kind of enterprise that we're all running, right? This new thing and this new business model. But we neglect those who are perhaps the most fit to lead it. And I'm talking about women here. So that's where I'd like to leave it, Randy. I think those are the two most important things on my agenda as I move forward.
That is the perfect way to wrap it up. We will link to everything we talked about today in the show notes. If people have more questions of you, is there a preferred method of communication?
Absolutely. They can email me, tfreeborn@xfcu.org. Happy to chat anytime.
Well, we will link to, we'll put that in the show notes as well. Thank you again so much for taking the time today. This has been so enjoyable. I hope everyone out there enjoys it and has a great day.
Thank you, Randy.
Thank you.
Take care.